Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen, of course. We got a lot to dive into in the NFL circles. Did you see this article we talked about earlier? The Bleacher Report had the 10 worst NFL deals of the last decade. 2 Eagles made the list, and then Nick Foles was on the list, and Sam Bradford. It was like an ineptitude of all capacity. But the 2 Eagles that made the list were DeMarco Murray and Nnamdi Asomugha. They were the 2 Eagles that made the 10 worst NFL deals of the last decade. But you don't really remember them all that much because the Eagles won the Super Bowl. So it's like, okay, they signed some bad contracts. All right, let's bring John in to conversate on the NFL happenings from the weekend and all that's going on. And, John, I guess – we didn't talk a whole heck of a lot last week regarding this CBA situation because we just kind of figured, all right, it'll work itself out. Where is that standing now? Was it extended, the vote over the weekend? Is that where we are at this point?
Yeah, they have another 48 hours. So instead of Thursday, it's going to be Saturday where you're going to hear either it's ratified or it isn't. I continue to still believe it's going to be ratified. If you're on Twitter, if you're on social media, you're probably going to think it's not. But as I always say, that's not the real world. And, it's interesting, and I always say, it's easy to advocate people strike when you don't have any skin in the game, but the vast majority of the NFL players are not going to be in this league for 10, 15 years. They have a very short shelf life to make a lot of money, and to ask them to give up a year of potentially what might be a 2 or 3 year career, that's a lot to do. So I don't think anybody's going to strike. I don't think there's going to be a lockout. I said from the start it's going to get ratified. I continue to believe that. Although Russell Okung is throwing some bombs out there trying to derail this. And it's generally the people that have ulterior motives. Okung is going to run for NFLPA president. Andrew Brandt might be running for executive director. So those are the people trying to derail this thing. But there's ulterior motives.
Did I see over the weekend that there are some owners that are still pushing for an 18th game?
Yeah, there was a story. There was a story that some owners would rather the players not ratify it so they could lock out, they could force the players to strike in an effort to sort of break the union and get 18 games. Remember, there's the owners didn't vote for this thing 32-0. I think there's misinformation about that end and that all the owners are trying to force this through. Some of the owners didn't want this CBA. So in theory, it could have been a few owners from that camp. And I always go back to the NBA lockout. If they go that route, they could probably force 18 games on players at some point. They could probably break the union as the NBA did, essentially. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I know. I saw Andrew Brandt actually kind of tweeting something about this in regards to, look, there wouldn't be a lockout or a strike or anything. They would use like XFL players essentially, and like you would see football games.
Potential. I mean, they did it way back in whatever it was, 82. But that was ugly. Replacement players. Look, if there is, you never know what's going to happen in the worst case scenario. I do think anything's on the table. If something goes so poorly that we're talking about a strike or a lockout that lasts over a calendar year or something of that nature, you can throw out all those examples and say, what can they do? What will they do? Bottom line is, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I don't, it is what it is. You have a bunch of people with ulterior motives on both sides, trying to force narratives down people's throats. And just like in the real world, the middle class is going to go to the ballot box and vote to keep their well-paying jobs. And I use that term middle class loosely. because a middle-class NFL player is still well off compared to the rest of society. But nonetheless, they don't want to stop working, and they enjoy their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how much you tell them not to enjoy their lives on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, they're not going to go for it.
John, why does it feel like, and we've talked about this before, we talked about it last week whenever discussing the new CBA, but why does it feel like there's just no leverage, and I put leverage in air quotes, with the players? Is that just 100% like contrived? Like, it just seems like the story
contrived.
is so wonky, and it's not the reality.
That's incredibly contrived. And again, it comes from people that have an end game in mind. And you can point to the owner side as well and point they have certain end games in mind, and they will say anything to get there. But I think everyone understands that. What they don't understand is there are people on the other side that have an end game in mind, and they will do whatever it takes to get there, including lie, cheat, and steal, to quote Eddie Guerrero. And that's what's going on. And, you know, there are such advances as far as quality of life, as far as revenue stream shares. The players got these things because of the leverage of that 17th game. So to say they have no leverage, they didn't do this correctly, it's just a falsehood. And by the way, it's insulting to the people that spent 10 months negotiating this thing. And nobody cares about D. Smith, but Eric Winston and everybody else on the executive committee and the players that actually go to these meetings and negotiating sessions, as opposed to J.J. Watt and Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, who never even show up to meetings and have tens of millions of dollars in the bank and don't have to work another day in the rest of their lives. But somebody who's making $700,000, and actually they would have been making $600,000, and has a mortgage payment, or maybe bought a house for their parents, guess what? They got to go to work.
Right. They need their next paycheck as quickly as possible. So do you think there are players then in the shadows looking at J.J. Watt and Russell Wilson saying, like, man, these guys don't have our best interest in mind? Like, we need to play, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it goes that far because, let's be honest, generally NFL players are very young and they don't have a ton of experience as far as being in the real world and understanding complex issues. It comes down to more basic things like I just mentioned. Well, I have a car payment, I have a house payment, I have a you-know-what payment, whatever. They know they gotta keep going.
Yeah.
And they also understand if you're the 53rd guy on the roster, if you're fighting and clawing to make an NFL roster every single year, that gravy train's going to run out soon, and you're going to strike and take a year out of that possibility. It's insanity.
Yeah. Russell Okung accuses the NFLPA staff of bad faith CBA negotiations, which could cloud a lot of stuff here. That's why over the weekend it seemed like some things may have changed here. We'll see. Keep our eye on all that. Of course, Football 4 will have it for you. Let's look at some of the news that's going on out there, John. One, Dallas reports that the Cowboys have sent a new deal to Dak Prescott. They've increased their latest offer to just over $33 million annually. What's going on with the deal for Dak Prescott? And, I mean, is it inevitable that they get a deal done, or are these numbers starting to make you scratch your head a little bit?
Well, it's inevitable a deal gets done. It's just a question of, do we have a Kirk Cousins situation where you're going to franchise until you can't franchise anymore, or are you going to work out a longer-term deal? You know, I always point to this, the Cowboys and their history versus the Eagles and their history. The Eagles have generally, dating back to the days of Joe Banner, they've gone early when it comes to extending contracts. They identify core players and they extend early to get the best deals possible. You saw it with Carson Wentz. it might not seem that way in the minutes when you sign a deal like Carson signed, but if you know the history of this league and you know the next quarterback sets the bar for the next quarterback and so on and so on and so on, and there have been people like Derek Carr, mediocre quarterbacks who were at one time the highest paid player in the history of football. That's how it goes. And the Cowboys never learn that lesson. So they end up paying a premium. They end up paying more money than they have to because they didn't act early, and that's what they're going through right now. But he's definitely going to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. The question is,
right? They plan to franchise him.
Franchise tag,
yeah,
or is it going to be long term?
Yeah, the Thursday deadline is why this comes up because the Cowboys will franchise Prescott if a deal isn't done before the Thursday deadline. $33 million on the table there. Let's go to New York, where the Jets have released Jermaine Johnson. Now, he got a big deal, 5-year deal back in 2018. The Jets are going to eat $12 million in dead money. They'll save $3 million from the release. But, you know, the next question that always comes when there's a name guy on the market is at a position the Eagles need. But the Jets couldn't get rid of this guy fast enough. So he doesn't make sense for Philly, or does he?
No, he could make sense for Philly because this is a situation where, and that's what we've talked about a lot with Byron Jones. I mean, one time Jermaine Johnson was Byron Jones, and he got overpaid because he hit the market, and he's a good corner, but he wasn't a great corner. And then he got into a scheme that didn't fit him, and he underachieved, and you are in the situation you're in. You just mentioned bad contracts. Bad contracts aren't really bad contracts, really. They're generally poor evaluation of players. And that's what we have with Jermaine Johnson. But all of a sudden, well, if you get him for 1 year and $7 million, that's a great deal. And I'd roll the dice on that all day long. Now, I think we'll have a bigger market than that because he's still relatively young, and I think people will give him multiple years. But depends how the market goes, and if it fluctuates to the point where he becomes a value, well, that's a need position for the Eagles, and I would roll those dice.
So I saw you tweet something out to someone who asked you the question, if you had to pick one guy to go all in on, like risk your career if you're the GM, who's the guy that you would gamble on? And you put Antoine Winfield Jr., Minnesota safety. Now, how does the Eagles' thinking with the draft and potentially getting a safety or a corner impact getting a guy like Jermaine Johnson, who's deemed the biggest bust in Jets history on the New York Post?
Well, it's different positions, number one. But
right.
If you talk about, and by the way, that a bunch of us were going back and forth. That's obviously who would you risk your reputation on outside of the obvious, the
sure.
top 10 guys who everybody has on their boards as a top 10 pick, and you understand they have the ceiling you need in the NFL. And Antoine Winfield Jr., I mean, he's got everything. He's a little bit undersized. He's even got the bloodlines. His father was one of the great cornerbacks in this league for a very long time. He's got tremendous versatility. He can play either safety position. He can play slot corner. So in a lot of ways, that's the way the NFL is going, and people have compared it to the NBA. In the NBA, you once had a point guard, shooting guard, power forward, small forward, center, and now you have positionless players, where a lot of people are looking like that's the way it's going in the NFL in the back seven. I don't think it's going to be that drastic, but anytime you can have a player with versatility, can play a bunch of different spots, hey, that's a positive. And you've seen it for years with the Eagles and Malcolm Jenkins. So that's his strength.
How confident are you, I should say, in the Eagles going into free agency and getting a guy, either a relatively big name that moves the needle for you, whether it's a Jermaine Johnson or a Byron Jones, either corner or receiver?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going all in for Byron Jones. So,
yeah.
I mean, it depends. obviously, if you're going to be the highest paid player at your position, you become a big name. And that's the concern when you compare Byron Jones right now to what Trumaine was at one point. And then, I've talked about expectations shifting things, and that's what happened with the Jets. It's not brain surgery. If you get paid like the best cornerback in football, well, most fans aren't going to watch the all 22 of every game of that particular corner. They see, oh, this is the top paid corner in football, so he should be one of the best cornerbacks in football. And generally, if you're one of the best cornerbacks in football, you're not getting a free agency. So as I've mentioned with the Eagles, you have to factor that in. And they've been wrong in the past with Byron Maxwell, Nnamdi Asomugha. Everybody understands. They've been wrong in the past in these type situations. So you have to factor that in. You have to factor in the Philadelphia market. Is this kid going to be able to hold up? And that has more to do with evaluation than anything else. But I think the Eagles have decided this is the guy they want.
Yep, that should be interesting to keep an eye on, and there's going to be other teams involved, by the way, on Byron Jones, and maybe the best thing will happen will be that the Eagles maybe come to be the runner-up in any Byron Jones sweepstakes. Let's look at a couple of other things with John McMullen here. One that I want to get into, Josh Norman signed with the Bills today, 1 year, $6 million, and that's kind of the deal that you just kind of threw out there, 1 year, $7 million for Johnson, but Norman wouldn't have made sense on a 1 year, $6 million deal, would he?
No, I don't think so. A couple things. He's older. He's a pure cover corner, and he's going back with Sean McDermott. That's where he became a star to begin with when he was in Carolina. Leslie Frazier is there still. Nobody plays as much cover two as Leslie Frazier once did, but that's sort of the corner that type of corner Josh Norman is. So that's a perfect fit for him. I don't know if he can play anymore. If he can play, he's got to be in that type of situation where coaches understand what he does well, whereas Johnson's still a little bit younger. But I think that's a positive for any cornerback here in Philadelphia as opposed to in the past, because Jim Schwartz is a lot better defensive coordinator than they've had in the past. And he will look at a player and look at what he does well and try to cobble things around it. But, I often talk about how fast-moving the cornerback position is in the NFL, and these are all perfect examples. Josh Norman was once one of the best 2 or 3 corners in this game. Johnson was once considered one of the best corners in this game. You're going to see Xavier Rhodes cut in the next week or so. He was an all-pro a couple years ago. Man, it goes quickly with these guys. It is a difficult position to play.
No doubt. You're right, man. These guys are on top. You hear them for 2-3 years, and the next thing you know, it's switching over to the next guy on the block. One guy that hasn't done that for is Tom Brady. His name has been at the top of the list for years. Mike Reese, ESPN Boston, reporting the Patriots will offer a deal around $25 million. So if that's the best offer, is he back in New England, or is there a better offer for him out there?
Well, I don't know if you guys saw, but he created his own production company today.
Uh-oh.
This is LeBron James all over again.
Oh, he's out.
This is
Chargers, here we come.
Uh-huh. Space Jam 3.
What I've been talking about again and again on this show. The only thing that makes sense besides New England is Los Angeles, and it has to do with reasons outside of football. If his mentality is this is the next part of my life, just like LeBron James, and he's created this production company, they announced it today, then the Chargers would be in play, makes sense. From the Chargers' perspective, you can sell tickets in that giant new stadium. Anything else, from a football perspective, nothing makes sense other than the Patriots.
All right. Well, that's definitely something more worth keeping an eye on now that he has thrown that into the mix. And, of course, the Raiders are only a 45-minute flight from L.A. And, of course, Dana White wants him to play for the Raiders. But
yeah, and by the way, when you say that, when you're that rich and you're that well off, New England's only a 5-hour flight. It doesn't take a lot, and especially when you can have a private plane, it doesn't take a lot to get to Los Angeles from anywhere. But again, with LeBron, I mean, LeBron could have flew back from Cleveland, Miami, wherever, but he always had Los Angeles in the back of his mind. If Tom has that in the back of his mind for his next stage of his life, he might want to get started sooner.
Yeah. All right.
I think we forget about the significant others a lot too.
Well, that as well. Yeah,
right.
That always comes into it.
Giselle might want to be in L.A. 365.
Possible. Did you watch any XFL this weekend?
Very little. I watched a little of the first game. This is the first week I haven't watched a significant amount. It's becoming tougher, and everybody understood that. You're right smack dab in the middle of the season. Now college basketball's heating up, finally. NBA, you're headed down the stretch, so it becomes more difficult, but I don't think anything changes. As a whole, I think the league has been a success. It's done better than the league itself expected, and I think it'll continue on that path.
All right. John McMullen, Football at 4. And, of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Good NFL conversation. We'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thanks, guys.